In this video, you're going to learn how to take simple, functional bass lines and turn them into bass lines that are singable, bass lines that hook your audience and are way more fun and interesting to play. We're going to take your bass lines to the next level. Welcome to Next Level Basslines. This is going to be a ton of fun. Here we'll take bass lines from the last lesson and take them to that next level. And there are two ways we're going to do that. You're going to add to the rhythms of the bass lines, and then you're going to hang notes off those rhythms. It's a super simple process and one that you can apply to pretty much any bass line that you're trying to create for yourself. So let's talk about our rhythmic options here. Now, if you remember, we had two kind of instant bass lines that we used. We had this one, and we had this one. Just over and over and over again. Now, they're fine as far as functional bass lines go. They fulfill their role. But let's take these to that next level. First, by adding some rhythm. Notice we're not changing the rhythms. The core rhythms of the bass line will remain the same. For our first one, and for our second one, it's yeah? If you change those, then it becomes a different groove and you run the risk of kind of falling out of sync with your drummer if you're playing with one, and then the groove will die, the audience stops listening, stops dancing, all the bad things that you don't want to happen. So where will we add the extra rhythms to the groove? One great place to add some extra flavor is at the end of bars before strong beats. Now, both bass line examples have space at the end of each bar that you can use to add some interest and some kind of extra rhythms. Yeah, let's start with the first bass line and see what we can do. Our first option is to add a quarter note on the end of every bar, staying on the same note. Yeah, so at this point we're just adding rhythms, not adding any extra notes yet. Yeah, so instead of this, we'll put an extra quarter note on the end of each bar. Not much of a difference now, but when we start replacing this note with the other ones, it'll really start coming to life, yeah? Now, what if we played 2 1/8 notes rather than a quarter note here? Well, that'd sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah? Once again, not crazy different, but it's enough to give it a little bit of extra flavor. Yeah? Now, what if we played 3 1/8 notes at the end of the bar instead of 2 1/8 notes? Well, that'd sound like this. Once it comes around, gotta start again. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah? Now, again, none of these are incredibly groundbreaking, but that'll change when we start using some other notes as well as the new rhythms. Now, let's see what some of our options are over that second bass line. Now, remember, we started with this. Pardon me. Yeah? Now, let's see what happens when we add just an extra 1/8 note at the end of the bass line there. Ba, ba, ba. Yeah, let's try that. Yeah? Yeah? Nice. What about adding an extra 1/8 note at the end so we have 3 1/8 notes at the end there? Yeah? Let's see how that sounds. 1, 2, 3, Yep, so in doing this, we've already added some rhythmic interest to these bass lines. They're a little bit more active, maybe a little bit more interesting, not much though, but we haven't started using any other notes yet. Now, there's a reason we start by adding some rhythmic interest though. Now that we have this taken care of, any notes that we hang off of these rhythms are automatically going to work. Now this is how I'd recommend you do this with all the bass lines you try and create. First, find that rhythmic core and embellish that without breaking it, and then hang notes off that embellishments. Now if you did it the other way, you messed with the notes first and then tried to fit rhythms around that, chances are the bass lines wouldn't be nearly as strong. But let's do this right now. Let's add some different notes to these rhythms. First of all, let's try using notes from the key that are below the root you're aiming for. So for example, if our bass line from number 1, our roots are A, F, C, and G. Now the note below the F, our second note, is an E. Yeah, the note below a C is a B, and the note below the G is an F. Yeah, and of course below the A is a G. So let's start off by playing that quarter note rhythm for this bass line. Yeah, if I grab up my track right here. Pardon me. Yeah? See, we're hanging that extra note off that rhythm that we already know is going to work. Yeah, do you see how this works? You're targeting the roots and just playing one note below each of those. Do you hear how it's providing some movement and some interest? It's not super complicated by any stretch of the imagination, by the imagination, but it elevates that bass line to something more than it was. Now let's do the same thing with 2 notes at the end of each bar. Now the first one can stay as the root, and the second one can be the note below the root. Yeah? So let's bring this back again. Yeah? Again, this makes it a little bit more interesting without destroying the groove. Let's do the same thing to the other bass line. Aim for the notes below the root. Now remember, our roots are F, E, D, and C, but we'll put the E, but below the E, we'll put a D. So we'll start on this F. We're aiming for this E right here, but we'll go below that and come back up to it. So we'll go 1, 2, yeah? And then below the D, we'll put a C, and then below the C, we'll put a B, yeah? So let's do this one with the 2/8 notes. So that's going to sound like this. Do it again. Again, this gives it some movement and makes things just a little bit more melodic. It's getting more and more singable as we go along, right? Next, let's take that same idea, but instead of aiming for the notes below the roots, let's aim for the notes above the roots. So once again, if we go back to our first bass line, the roots we have for this are A, F, C, and G. We'll put a G before the F, a D before the C, and an A before the G, and a B before the A. Yeah? So if you just want to use the quarter note rhythmic add-on, it's going to sound like this. This is actually super similar to Flea's bass line in the Chili Peppers song Other Side. Check it out if you get a chance, and you'll hear this exact kind of bass line in the choruses. Even the best bass players in the world use these exact kind of ideas to create super interesting next level bass lines. Now if we apply this idea to our second bass line, we'll use 2/8 notes and we'll get something like this. Remember, our roots in this case are F, E, D, and C. So we're going to go from this F, pass through the G to the F to get to the E. So that's going to sound like this. This one is super melodic and super simple. Every step we go with these bass lines, the better they sound because we're injecting melody right into them. Rather than having boring, dull bass lines, we're creating extra hooks that will make our audience pay attention to the song. They may not even know why they're paying attention, but they are, and you will have helped do that. Let's take this melodic approach even further this time. Let's use the 3/8 note rhythmic variation for both bass lines and try and come up with a little melody that will work through the whole progression. Yeah, the secret here is to keep things simple. The more complicated you make things, the more your audience is likely to stop listening. Now, you don't need to play super fast. You just need to play super catchy. Now let's see what we can do with these bass lines. Now for the first one, let's try something like let's try that. So that's going to be a B, C, G, and then let's see if that works over the whole, over all the chords. So after every chord, we'll go back and play B, C, G, and then go to the next chord. So let's give it a try. Oh, wrong track. Yeah, it's kind of cool. It feels a little bit clunky over some of the progression, but it does work just fine. With a little bit more kind of crafting and honing, that bass line could be a true hook in the song. It's singable, it's functional, and it's way more interesting than playing the original bass line that we had. This is now a truly next level bass line. Let's try the same thing with the second bass line. Let's see what we come up with. Let's see if that works over the whole thing. So I'm going to go F, and then E, Let's see if see how that sounds with the track. I like that. Actually, at the end there, I'm hearing this, a little walk up to that F there, rather than doing that kind of thing again. I'm hearing, that's it. Let's play that with the track. Walk up here. Yeah. I really like that. How much better than that is the original bass line that we had? Now, I don't know about you, but I like both of the bass lines that we ended up with way better than the kind of instant bass lines that just followed the bass drum pattern. Not that there's anything wrong with that at all, but these are way more interesting, way more fun, but just as functional. There's another thing to notice too. Notice how all these examples kept the groove intact. We didn't mess around with that core of the groove. The core was still there in the first bass line, and the second bass line, All we did was kind of add things on top of them. The core rhythm would be like the base of a sponge cake. It's totally edible and totally tasty, but kind of a bit boring by itself. But if you add all the extra icing and fruit and candles and frosting writing, that's when you've got something that you want to eat. In our case, the extra notes and rhythms that made things interesting, those were the extras on top of that sponge cake. Now these are just examples, and there are definitely tons more options. Honestly, we've just barely scratched the surface when it comes to all the creative kind of things you can do with bass lines, but these ideas will get you started and get your bass lines to that next level. Use the ideas you've found here, inject them into your own bass lines. Go even further and see if you can see these same kind of ideas in songs you already know. I'm sure you'll be able to find tons of examples. Now, if you need the tabs and notations for all the examples in this video, you'll find them right below. Thanks so much for hanging out with me while I nerded out over some bass lines. I can't get enough of this stuff, so thank you so much for indulging me. I really appreciate it. I'm Luke McIntosh from BecomeABassist.com, and I'll talk to you very, very soon. Cheers.